this webinar. I would like to start the webinar by welcoming everyone to attend the next World Potato Congress that to be held in Kenya next October. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available later this week on the World Potato Congress website. Please ask any questions in the Q&A tab, and I will answer them after I have completed the full presentation. Thank you to all of the sustaining partners shown here for your support of these educational opportunities. So I'm going to start. My name is Christine Noronha, and I'm a research scientist in the area of integrated pest management with agriculture and agri-food Canada. So today I'm going to talk about using crop rotation to control wireworms in agricultural fields. I'm physically located in Prince Edward Island, which is along the east shore of Canada, eastern coast of Canada. And our research station is in Charlottetown. Now, Prince Edward Island is well known for its potatoes. Our main crop on the island is potatoes, and we produce 25% of the potatoes that are produced in Canada. So in the early 2000s, we started to see problems with wireworms. And so I'm going to start my presentation with just saying a little bit about wireworms. So wireworms belong to the insect family Elateridae. The adults are called click beetles, and the term wireworm is used mainly for the larval stage. And it's this larval stage that causes most of the damage to the crop. It's a global pest found in many different areas. It's most common in temperate climates, and it's typically found in grasslands, arable soils, weedy areas where there's high moisture. And it's definitely associated with any area or any field where there was a history of grass cultivation, because if the field is not worked up, they just keep building up in that field. So it's associated with those areas. A little bit about the life cycle of this insect. Is this life cycle that makes it so problematic. The adults, the click beetles, they emerge in the spring. They will lay their eggs, and then the eggs hatch, and the larvae start feeding on the roots and seeds of plants that are available to them in the field. They'll feed all summer long, and they'll grow as they feed. And then in the fall, they will feed on potatoes and other root crops that are available to them. But unlike other insects that will actually move and become pupa and adults, these wireworms, they'll remain wireworms. They will just go down into the soil profile to overwinter, and then they come back as the temperature in the spring, soil temperature increases. They will come back to the surface and they'll start feeding again on any new seeds planted, seedling roots, plant roots, whatever is available to them. And this lasts for 2 to 5 years, depending on the species. And this is what causes the problem, because once we have eggs laid in the field, there are wireworms there. And every year, adults come out and they will lay more eggs. So in a field, there may be many generations present in that one field. We also, once the larvae mature, they will pupate. It's sometime in the fall. And then they emerge again as adults in the spring. So this 2 to 5 year life cycle of this causes all the issues for us, because it's the larval stage that causes the damage. Another aspect of this insect is that it has a very wide range of hosts. It feeds on, I just have a few here, which this cabbage, carrots, onions, potatoes, rutabagas, um, corn, and like in these fields where you are seeing these no plants, uh, these are not just misses while planting. This is actually the wireworms have eaten these plants and destroyed them. So they cause a big problem to growers in the spring as well as in the fall. Spring with the seeds, and in the fall with the root crops. There's many different wireworm species out there, but not all of them are pests. There are 39 that have been documented as attacking potatoes. The species composition varies with geographical regions, and even sometimes within the fields, there may be different species and multiple species in the same location. We've seen this on the island. There's 2 or 3 different species that are present. Um, in Prince Edward Island, the predominant species is Agriotis putata. We do have Hypnoidus abbreviatus as well, but Agriotis putata is the one that is the most commonly present in the fields where we are seeing damage, and it's quite widespread. It has moved and become quite widespread on the island. Agriotis lineatus and obscurus are also present, but they are more localized, and I have seen them moving a little bit, but the numbers are a little bit lower when compared to Agriotis putata, but they are also causing damage to the crops here. So when we started this study, we started looking at wireworms because in 2004 is when we recorded our crop failure, the first crop failure due to wireworms. So we decided to start working on them. We looked at chemicals. Borate or Thimet was available that kills wireworms, but uh, there are a lot of restrictions on using this chemical, and growers had to use special equipment on their sprayers in order to use this chemical. So it was not the easiest chemical to use. The other chemicals that we have, all the neonics, they just paralyze the wireworm, so they didn't really get rid of the problem, and it was always there. In 2022 is when brofenolide, which is a new chemical, was registered in Canada, and we know that kills. So between 2004 to 2022, there was really nothing that the growers could use, or very few chemicals that the growers could use. So we decided to look at rotation crops. Are there rotation crops that could be used? What are rotation crops? This is an agricultural practices of planting different crops in the same field across a sequence of growing seasons or years. And there's a lot of benefits to crop rotation. But in some countries, the growing season is long, and when you have a long growing season, this allows for 2 or 3 crops to be grown sequentially in the same year. Whereas in countries like Canada, where there's a shorter growing season, there's only 1 crop annually. So the rotation in this case is actually over multiple years. So in Prince Edward Island, the growers follow a 3-year crop rotation. And prior to this study that we when we started with crop rotations, the normal rotation consisted of potatoes, followed by barley undesseeded to clover, and then clover continued to grow the following year, and then would be worked into the soil, and potatoes planted again. That was the normal rotation that growers followed. So when we started this study, we decided to look at brown mustard, buckwheat, and alfalfa as the 3 crops that we wanted to use in rotation, and barley, which we know that the wireworms feed on feed on barley quite willingly. We use that as our check or our um, control treatment in our study. So why did we choose these crops? So buckwheat we know has allelopathic properties. So because of these allelopathic properties, we thought maybe they would be detrimental. It would be detrimental to wireworm survival. So we decided to use that, and this is the rate that we used it at. Brown mustard, it has glucosinolates, and those can be toxic to insects and nematodes. So we decided to use the brown mustard, but we used brown mustard, which is Brassica gensea. I'll talk about it a little bit more later on. And then we used alfalfa. The reason why we chose alfalfa is alfalfa has soil drying properties, and we know that wireworms don't like dry soil. It is detrimental to their survival. So we thought maybe alfalfa would be helpful to use as a rotation crop. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're using barley. So what we did was we did this trial in 3 different fields in different areas of the province. Each field had all 4 crops, and there were 4 replicates of each of the crops. The replicates were 1 acre in size, each for each of these crops. And it was in a randomized design. So the year 1, we had all 4 crops in each field. Year 2 again, and then in year 3, we grew potatoes. So this was, we were in a situation where there wasn't many tools in the toolbox. So we used an extreme measure. And this extreme measure was having 2 years of the rotation crop and 2 crops per year. So there were some reasons why we did this. So we planted in June, and by August we worked we dipped the crop into the soil, and there were two reasons for. There was a reason for this is because the growers were kind of concerned about mustard becoming an issue later on in the season. So before the seeds matured, we worked them in. We worked it in, and we also wanted to have some biofumigation to see if that would help in reducing the population as well. And then we planted a second crop. The reason for planting a second crop was because of the biology and behavior of this insect. It feeds very voraciously in the fall, just before it goes into the overwintering phase. So we wanted to have a crop that has potential to be detrimental to them, to their survival. We wanted that in the field at that time in the fall. So we planted a second crop in the fall, and then that crop was allowed to stay in the field, and it also provided protection from soil erosion and other over the winter months. So that was another reason why we wanted to have a second crop in that field and not leave it bare. So we did that for 2 years, and then we planted in year 3. We planted potatoes. So the year that we planted potatoes, at the end of the year, we went and harvested huge areas with of potatoes, hand harvested them, brought them back to the lab, and they were assessed for table and processing market. For the table market, it was mainly the number of holes per tuber, so we counted the number of holes per tuber. For the processing market, we went to a processor, and we found out how they evaluate damage. So what's done is usually the damaged area is removed by peeling the tuber. And if the tuber loses over 5% of its weight, it is classified as unmarketable. So based on the severity of the damage and what we found, the tubers were placed either in the marketable or unmarketable group. Any of the tubers that were either too large or culls were also evaluated this way, but they were not in the marketable group in the total market yield. And then we looked at the yield from each of the groups. So what did we find? So this is our first field, and what we found, like when we look at total yield, I'm showing you total yield here because we wanted to see, do these crops affect the growth of the plant and the yield from the plant? Because some rotation crops can do that. So we wanted to see that. So as you can see, the brown mustard, buckwheat, barley, and alfalfa, there was no significant in total yield. This included everything that we took from the field. And then we looked at market yield. This was just the market. This was taking out all the little culls, less than 2-inch tubers, taking those out. And that gave us the market yield. And as you can see, there was no significant difference. There was no, in following one of the crops, you didn't have more culls or anything like that. We had good market yield, no significant difference. The differences we started to see the differences when we looked at the damage. So here you had percent tubers with no damage. You can see that the percent tubers with no damage is significantly higher than in the barley and the alfalfa. The holes per tuber was also significantly lower as compared to the alfalfa. And even the tons per hectare lost was significantly lower as compared to the alfalfa and the barley. And so at the end, the tubers that would be the tons per hectare that would be considered marketable for the processing industry was significantly higher as compared to the barley and the alfalfa. Now this field that we did this study in, it had, when we started initially, we took wireworm counts from this field, and there was 28 wireworms per bait. 2 wireworms per bait are considered to be at the threshold. So we were way over the threshold in this field. The next field that we did, we were also over the threshold. We had 4 wireworms per bait, but still lower than what the other field was. But we saw the same trend. There was no significant difference in yields, no significant difference in market yield. The percent tubers with no damage was significantly higher, and this is important for the table industry to know that. The holes per tuber also was lower, which again is good for the table market potatoes, and tonnage lost was lower, and also yield was market yield for processing was higher, tons per hectare. In our third field, which had 2 wireworms per bait, which is considered the threshold, we found the same trend. The same trend was visible, where you had market tubers for processing was significantly higher, tons per hectare. The holes per tuber were lower. So you can see that there was definitely all 3 fields showed the same thing, and it didn't matter what your population was in that field. We did see a significant decrease in damage in all 3 fields. So we knew that this strategy worked, but this strategy was an extreme strategy, and because we wanted to use it to address the urgent need, but it's not economically viable to be planting 2 crops and paying for seed and just working it in. So we wanted to, once we knew that, we told our growers, this is what you can use if you want to go right now. This is what you could use. But we are also looking at other aspects. So we asked 4 questions. Can the plants be mowed and allowed to regrow? Do we have to plant a second crop, or just mow the crop, let it regrow? It's still available for the roots are still available for the wireworms to feed on them in the fall, and it also provides ground cover. The other question was, can we grow it for 1 year? Would it give us the same results? Can we harvest it for seed? Because both brown mustard and buckwheat, there's a market for them. brown mustard is grown for Dijon mustard, to make Dijon mustard, and buckwheat flour is grown for flour, and it's gluten free. It has a lot of benefits to buckwheat flour. So there are markets for these crops. So said, can it be grown for seed and still produce and still give the chemicals that are harmful to wireworms? And then we also wanted to will incorporation and as a biofumigant give us other benefits, like with diseases and other pests like nematodes. We wanted to look at that as well. So in order to do that, we looked at buckwheat and brown mustard. It was more they start harvested for 1 year, and we looked. So this is the mode section, and this is the this section. Now we did do another study where we looked at mowing, like how high do you have to mow, and we found 6 inches was good. 4 inches it didn't really grow back, but 6 to 8 inches the crop actually grew back into and became a really nice big crop. But it didn't produce seeds. The second crop didn't produce any seeds. And what did we find? We found that the mustard and the buckwheat, it didn't matter. For the mustard, it didn't matter if it was mowed or incorporated, produced as seed. We still got significantly lower damage as compared to the barley, as compared to when it was the barley check. We looked at buckwheat, the same thing, and it didn't matter if it was disked or if it was mowed. We had fewer wireworms. This was done in a cabbage field, so we were actually trapping wireworms. And you can see didn't matter if it was disked or if it was mowed. We still had significantly lower numbers in our buckwheat fields, buckwheat sections at least. So why does brown mustard work? So it's very important to understand that it's not all mustards, it's brown mustard. It's Brassica gensea that works. And that's because Brassica gensea has an allele glucosinolate. It's this allele factor that actually is considered to be toxic to insects. It also, as a biofumigant, it produces the isothiocyanates when it is disked into the soil. And as well, the roots of the brown mustard have 2-phenylethyl, which is known to be toxic to insects. So white mustard, yellow mustard, oriental mustard don't have these factors in them, don't have these chemicals. And that's why it's very important to use Brassica gensea as the rotation, the brown mustard. For buckwheat, when we started this trial, we didn't know why buckwheat worked. There was this assumption out there that it repels. It's repelling the wireworms. But we didn't think that was all it was doing, because if it repelled the wireworms, we know that wireworms are quite capable of surviving without food for a long time. So it couldn't be repelling wireworms because they would still be there. And then we also found fewer wireworms. So it was why were we finding fewer wireworms in our fields? So we knew that there was something else going on there. So we used the Nell trap to trap males and females of click beetles, and we obtained eggs. And from when those eggs hatched, we used the newly hatched larvae and did a lab trial where we put them into buckwheat plants or barley plants, and we allowed them to feed for a length of time that is normal that they would feed in a field situation. So we allowed them to grow and feed in those plants. And here you can see survival was significantly lower in the buckwheat as compared to the barley and the buckwheat plants. But what was really interesting for us to see is that the wireworms in the barley, how they grew in these pots. So we found the wireworms in the barley were nice big fat wireworms, and they all started off at the same stage. They were just newly hatched. They all started off at the same stage. So we had several nice and big and fat, and then we had the buckwheat fed wireworms, and you can see how small they are, and they eventually died. So it was actually having a negative influence on the survival of these larvae. Um, and then we did these trials with larger wireworms, and the larger wireworms also showed this because we found that this is the head capsule of a normal wireworm, and this is the head capsule of a wireworm that was feeding on buckwheat roots. So it's doing something to the physiology of these insects, and they eventually die because we found the same increase in mortality with the larger wireworms when we tested them. And our chemist identified a novel compound which exhibits the biopesticidal activity. So we know that there is some pesticidal activities in the in the buckwheat itself. We also looked at. I was talking about different what other benefits there would be, and we found one of our scientists, Dr. Aaron Mills, found that it didn't matter if you disked buckwheat, flailed it, or even harvested it. It controlled the root. It reduced the root lesion nematodes in the field. So that was really exciting to us. And I know for the brown mustard, when it's disked in, growers have found it, and we found it that it's known to reduce verticillium, rhizoc, and a few other diseases in the field. So we know that both these crops work, but this buckwheat seems to be working, even if it seems to be that it's exuding from its roots chemicals um, are not good for the survival of the root lesion nematode. We looked at other crops. After this trial was over, we said, let's look at some other crops. Southern Sudan grass was one of them, and flax. It tended to show that there might be something in there, so we decided to look at them. And what did we find? We found that buckwheat was much better than the other crops, but sorghum Sudan grass also gave us significantly lower numbers of holes per tuber, so compared to the flax and the barley. So there is something going on with the sorghum Sudan grass, which we need to tease out a little bit more, work on it and tease it out a little bit. So during all this time, we were looking at oh, we did started surveying the wireworm population across the island, and we went back to the same site every 2-3 years to look at what the population was in these fields. And also it was a way to evaluate our strategy. How do we what's happening to the wireworm population? So we found that in 2012 that was the population. 2016 we had 45,000 beetles on the island in those 85 fields. And then we started to see a decrease. That decrease happened around the same time that there was an increase in the plantings of buckwheat and mustard. So at first in 2015 growers, 2013, 14, 15, the few growers were using this buckwheat and mustard, but as time passed, more and more growers started using it. So it became like an area-wide use of these crops, and we saw a decrease, and then a further decrease in 2020. So these were the number of click beetles trapped, and then we found we also found that in 2012, 16, and 19, all the fields had wireworms in them. But by 2022, we had only 62 fields that had, the rest showed absolutely no wireworms, no click beetles in those fields. So it's telling me that the fields were kind of cleaned up by that time. And what was the most interesting was this. We found that only 3 fields had over 1,000 beetles. And when I say 1,000 plus, it is like 1,500 or less than 2,000 beetles per field in these 3 fields. But when you compare it to 2016, there were 12 fields that had over 1,000 beetles. And at that time, it wasn't, it did, most of the fields had like 2,000 to 5,000 beetles. So there was definitely a decrease in not only in the population, but also in the number of fields that were infected with wireworms. So what was the outcome of this whole research that we did? And we came up with a management strategy to reduce wireworm damage. So what to tell our growers? The recommendation is first evaluate the field, see what the population is, and then make a decision on which management option is best for that particular field. And if the wireworm pressure is low, then maybe these crops could only be grown for 1 year. If the wireworm pressure is really high, then we could go with brown mustard or buckwheat for 2 years, because that is going to definitely kill anything that's there. And because sometimes wireworms will not feed, they're molting, they're in the process of molting, so they're not feeding, or something else is going on, or they're feeding on weeds. So that's why if the population is really high, it's better to grow 2 crops. uh, um, Incorporating brown mustard provides biofumigation and disease control. But if it's not, if it's not what is needed, biofumigation, then it appears that the crop itself is giving some biofumigation, as we saw in the buckwheat, that there is some level of biofumigation happening without the need to incorporate it. And there is a market for these both these crops. The other thing I wanted to say is it is important to understand that this is not what you do year after year after year after year. It is because it could be expensive to do this. And my recommendation is to put these crops in and clean out the field. And then once the field is clean, then it can be thrown into the rotation every once in a while. Put in a buckwheat crop or a mustard crop. It doesn't need to be done year after year after year once a field has been cleaned up from wireworms. So I would like to acknowledge my staff. There's a lot of work going into peeling potatoes. Um, and I would also like to thank the organizers too for inviting me to give this presentation and to talk about my research. That's my contact information. If anybody is interested in contacting me, you're free to do so. And thank you for attending this webinar. I will now move into answering some of the questions that you have. Okay, so the first question is, why won't canola, a commercial crop, help as a cover crop to suppress wireworms? Have you tried it? Canola has been bred to so that it doesn't have as high levels of glucosinolates in it. And that's the reason why it won't work. And you'd actually find wireworms feeding on canola. It's because of the levels of glucosinolates. Um, I personally, okay, so does the brown mustard suppress nematodes? Any information? How about reducing verticillium wilt levels in soil? I personally am not a pathologist, so I haven't really looked at it, but my colleagues have looked at it, and I know my colleague is when he's working in diseases, he doesn't want mustard in his rotation because it does reduce verticillium. I think there is some information out there, and as a biofumigant, it would suppress nematodes as well. And there is probably some information out there on that. Does excessive use of insecticides make wireworms harder to control over time? Because of the long life cycle of wireworms, it'll take very long for them to develop resistance. Unlike other insects um, that reproduce every year, the more generations there are in a year, the faster the development of resistance. But with wireworms, they have such a long life cycle, so really development of resistance is much slower than you would expect with like potato beetles or diamondback moths kind of insects. What is the best economic way to handle wireworms? Would chemical control not give 100% control and one can plan commercial crops every year? Yes, chemical controls do work. You have to understand if there's a field is really bad. Chemicals, it, crop rotation and chemicals are all tools in this big toolbox that we can go after wireworms. Um, Wireworms are, because of their life cycle and that every year they're coming in and laying eggs. So if there is a crop in there that has that is good for the wireworms, they're going to come in and lay eggs, and then the eggs are going to be there, and the wireworms are going to be there. So chemicals work really well for this, and it's one of the tools that can be used for wireworm control. But if there are no chemicals available, and in certain countries, in certain parts of the world, there are no chemicals that can be used in soil. And as a result, these other methods are what is important for choose. How does soil type, sandy versus clay, influence wireworm survival and damage? Sandy soil, from my understanding, is that sandy soil is something that wireworms are like, because it's easier to move through sandy soil as compared to clay soil, but they are present in both. It it doesn't influence survival as much, and damages. They'll be able to, unless it's really dense soil that is very wet and it's harder for them to move through, then you might have, it would be more difficult, but otherwise they move through all kinds of soil. They're like tanks, they move through everything. Which disease is worst in Canada, nematodes or wireworms? I don't work with nematodes, so I can't tell you that. I just work with insects. So, are there restrictions on the use of chemicals for this purpose? In Canada, there are chemicals that are registered. In other countries, it all depends on the country and what their restrictions are on the use of chemicals. So I can't really speak to that. What is the preferred method of bait trapping? So there are several things that can be used. There are many different types of baits, and it's how much time you want to spend on the baits. The bait that we use, and I work with the growers which would be easy for growers to do, is carrot baits. We just chop carrots, put it in the ground, and come and pick it up after 5 days. We've found that 5 days is in our movement trials that we did, we found 5 days is a good time to take out those carrots and then just go through them. Wheat is really good, but that has to be prepared beforehand because you have to prepare the pots of wheat. So that's more it's a lot more work before you take it to the field to do that, to put them in. But carrots, we just go and pick up carrots from the grocery store and chop them up, put them in. So there are many different types of baits. Some have to be prepared beforehand and some later. Soil pH. There's a lot of information out there. I have not worked with it personally myself, so I can't speak to it. But there is some indication of the soil pH having an influence. I don't think so, but but I have never done any studies on this to really say for certain that it does. After using brown mustard or buckwheat as cover crops for wireworm suppression, how long does it typically take for wireworm population to rebound to levels that cause economic damage in potatoes? So that's an interesting question, because after you use the crops, there is going to be some there is going to be some suppression. But if there are areas around you where there are a lot of wireworms, the adults are going to come up and lay eggs. So they're going to come to the field to lay eggs. Now, because it has a 5-year life cycle, every 5 years is when you will see that because of the 5-year life cycle, it takes a little bit longer for the populations to build up. It won't be like in year 1 or year 2, you're going to see like a huge number of wireworms. It just takes a while because of the life cycle of these wireworms. But I would say, if these crops are used every 4 or 5 years, go in and put another crop in there just to keep the population down, because eventually they are going to rebound, because the beetles are going to fly in and lay eggs in that field. What do you use for trapping wireworms to end up the commercial threshold of 2 wireworms per bale? It's 1 to 2 wireworms. Really, it's very difficult to know the population in the field, because it's aggregated in the field. They may or may not come to your bait if there's another food source. So that's the reason why the threshold is so low. We say that's a threshold, but really, if you don't find wireworms, doesn't mean that there are no wireworms in that field. It depends on when the bait is put in, if it's put into an area where the wireworms are. So we always say err on the side of caution. And if you are seeing damage in your tubers or on your plants, then you have wireworms. But it's really difficult to say for sure that this field is doesn't have wireworms, because they may not come to your bait. Okay. What's the cost of mustard seed per acre? I'm not sure what it is right now, so I can't really answer to that. But years ago it was a little bit cheaper, but now I can't really answer that question at this point in time. So by growing buckwheat until the seeds are harvested, do we obtain better control of wireworms than with flail or disc or harrow? Thanks for the presentation. No, we found that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you grow buckwheat and harvest the seed, or if you flail it, or if you disc it in. It doesn't matter. It still gives you significant reduction in damage to the crop. Would seed combination of mustard and buckwheat be expected to give a similar reduction in larval reduction to monoculture or of either species on their own? I like to go with the single crop. Brown mustard. I'm sorry, there's some construction going on in this building, so I can hear. Oh no. Sorry about that. Um, Sorry about that. The buckwheat uh, is uh, okay. Let me see now. I lost track of my thought here because of all the noise. Um, give similar reduction in larvae. Actually, I wouldn't grow brown mustard and buckwheat together because they kind of buckwheat has allelopathic properties that reduces it gives you weed control, so it produces these chemicals in the soil that would stop other plants from growing, and that's why we you grow it for weed control. So it would be it I think it's best to grow the brown mustard and the buckwheat separately as monocultures, much better than trying to put them together. It's just because of the impact that they have on each other. Buckwheat is a warm temperature. It needs warm temperatures, so we have to grow it in Canada. We grow it a little bit later. It's very cold susceptible. So even though it will grow as soon as there's a first frost, buckwheat will it'll kill the buckwheat. So it needs to be grown in a little bit warmer when the temperatures are a little bit warmer, and there's no chance of frost because frost kills buckwheat. Uh, could intercropping brown mustard in potatoes work? Oh, I tried that. I did try that. It was kind of difficult because the potatoes um, tend to form a canopy, so they reduce the light to the mustard, so you don't have the mustard is not doesn't really grow very well in as an intercrop. But when we planted it after the potatoes were growing, so maybe if it's planted at the same time, it might take away from the potatoes because it's going to use the nutrients. So it's something that should be looked at if anyone's interested in it. Okay, do you expect intercropping brown mustard in the rotation to conflict with with also growing canola due to the allelopathic uh, reaction? So brown mustard is not doesn't have the same allelopathic um, uh, properties that buckwheat does. So it could be grown in rotation, and that's the reason why we were looking at what effects it would be carried over into the potato crop, and we looked at the total yield and the total market yield because of these things. Because brown mustard, buckwheat has these allelopathic properties, but we didn't see anything in our trial, so I don't think it would have anything. But if brown mustard in rotational conflict with growing canola, yes, because their brown mustard has the same diseases as canola would have. So if there is a problem with clubroot, it's not a good idea to put brown mustard into that field. Into that field, I would recommend putting buckwheat because that would break the cycle. If brown mustard is planted, there's going to be problems, and even with other insects and other diseases. So they're in the same family of brassicas, so it's not recommended to grow brown mustard and canola in the same field. Um, no. Did you ever test green manure with the kind of sorghum, um, like rhizog variety? It seems to have a bigger level of glucosinolates. No, I have never tried that crop in in our trials. Okay, what is for you the best way to kill or reduce the adults in a rotation? And is there a model to predict the adults flying? No, I do not have a model to predict flying, but um,
I have tried. I tried to use the nail trap, because the nail trap is the only trap that actually collects females. So we put the nail trap out really early in the season, and it'll where our plan is that the nail trap will catch the gravid females before they lay eggs. So if you can take the adults, the females, out of the system before they lay eggs, that would reduce the population. But I don't have any model to predict adult flying. I haven't seen adult flying in the field. I don't know what time they fly, or but we have seen them in other locations that they were not supposed to be in. So I know that they are actually flying, but I don't know what time of the day and what conditions are required for them to fly. I know with potato beetles, there are certain conditions that have to be met for them to fly. Uh, when you mowed the mustard and the buckwheat, oh, I think I lost that. Okay. When you mowed the mustard and the buckwheat, at what stage were they priority to prior to flowering or flowering a seed? We plowed they were at the end of flowering, and there were some seeds, but the seeds had not matured. So that's the time that we mowed the mustard in. So flowering to before seeds become mature is the timeline that we used. Yeah, I would. I've never tried. The question is, can we plant potato and buckwheat at the same time because of limited land? Um, I've never tried putting buckwheat with potatoes. I'm not sure if it's together in the same field at the same in the same location. It's intercropped. It might have an influence on the potatoes. I've never tried it myself, but I think seeing how buckwheat works, and that buckwheat um, is detrimental to weed growth, um, I think it might, if it's grown together, like in very close proximity with the potato plant, or it's together with the potato plant, it might have an influence on a negative influence on the potatoes. You're very welcome. We are working with brown mustard and see sawfly as a pest. Any experience and advice there? Um, w- we don't have a sawfly here on the island, so we haven't really seen any damage by this pest. But I don't have any experience with it. But I would suggest: is there a way to control this with pesticides, or I'll have to think about this, Fred. And I can get back to you on this one, because I don't have the experience, but I can look at sawflies and see what we can do with that. But really, I don't have the experience with sawflies. Any other questions? I think that's the end of the questions, and we are coming to the end of our presentation. So if there's no if there are no other questions, or if anybody has a burning question that they would like to put in the Q&A, you have 5 minutes. Thanks, you're very welcome. Looking at anything else? Thank you. You're very welcome. Are you going to write this up for publication? Yeah, I have written up for the the buckwheat that we worked on. We do have a publication for that, but yes, I'm working on this. I've been so busy looking at all these crops and having fun with the research that I haven't really written it up, but I am going to that's my priority for the next year, is to sit down and write all these papers, so it will be published. Okay. Uh, okay, so you'll be able to find these slides on the potato, as I'd mentioned, on the World Potato Congress website. This recording will be available later this week on the website. Thank you very much. As somebody said, just wanted to say I'm very impressed with all the work you have done. Is it possible, please, to share the PPT as well? It would be useful. Yes, it is going to be on the World Potato Congress website, so you can have access. You will have access to that. Okay, there's have any native plants being tested for their properties against fireworms as flower strips around fields or the like? No. It was very difficult coming up with even these two crops, because we didn't know. We went in there blind. We just thought, okay, like I looked up and I read a lot about the buckwheat and the mustard, and just by reading it, I thought, well, it has these allelopathic properties and there's other properties that these two crops have, and that's why we decided to go with them, with these crops. We weren't really sure if they were going to work, but we thought, let's just do it. So since then, we looked at, like I said, we looked at flax and sorghum, Sudan grass, but no, we have not looked at any native plants or flowers, what they would, if they would be grown in strips. Anything grown in strips would need to be attractive to the wireworm so that they would move towards them. It would be like a trap crop, um, kind of method that would be used. So I don't, but I don't know of any flowers. I've seen the adults, they are very fond of eating flowers, and they go to the wildflowers that are around. We've seen them feeding on those. But I don't know. There's probably native plants that are out there that have properties, but we'll have to really search for them. Thank you very much, Kefu. Okay. I'm just looking at. I think that's it. Thank you very much for attending. And if you have any questions, you have my contact information. Please feel free to contact me anytime, and I can give you information that you require. Thank you very much.